like me to sit here, or shall I just disappear into the back?
I think I can handle it. If not, I'll ask for help. Okay.
Sorry.
See you later.
Goodness. Which doors?
Man, these chairs squeak so bad.
Would you like to check your mics? Be sure they're working.
Hello.
Hello?
Good evening. My name is Marty Falwell. I'm with the League of Women Voters of North Pinellas County, and I agree thoroughly with the speaker who recently said our most important government job is as a citizen. Thank you for taking that seriously. The election is going to be on March 14th. This is for one city commission seat. We have 3 people running for that seat. The registration deadline, if you have not yet registered, is February 13th for that election. You may request a mail ballot. For domestically, the deadline for that would be February 7. These gentlemen are running for seat 1 for the Tarpon Springs City Commission. And before I introduce them, I'd like to mention our wonderful website of the Supervisor of Elections in Pinellas County. It's very user-friendly. You can get all kinds of information on it, and it is simply www.votepinellas.com. And I just learned tonight that they even have college scholarships, which if it's not applicable to you, you might tell other people about that. The format for tonight is that each candidate will have 2 minutes for an introductory statement, and then after that, and we will, the order has been set up, but each time we have a new question, somebody else will go first. It'll be rotating. 1 minute for questions and 1 minute for closing remarks. The closing remarks will be the opposite order of the opening remarks. We thank our timers, Becky Snyder and Mary Rao. And they won't bite you if you go over time, but please, please try to abide by the signs. You'll get 30-second and 15-second warnings. Our candidates are Frank DiDonato, Jacob Carr, and Tim Kafalis. So opening remarks, Mr. Donato.
Thank you all for coming, and thanks to the Women's League of Voters and to the city for getting this event here today. I'm Frank DiDonato. I'm running for seat 1, City Commission, Tarpon Springs, a beautiful town that I've grown to love. I've been here right at 40 years now. It's been 15 years, a little over, since I had the privilege of serving in the past to help things grow and become even more unique in Tarpon. And I have some ideas and some experience that I think will lead us, and I could contribute along with the commissioners and the mayor to make this city continue to grow and be a place in which we're all very proud of. I've served in many organizations and been president of most of them. The Boys and Girls Club, the Rotary Club, the Elks Club, I was past president of the Chamber of Commerce on more than one occasion. I'm involved simply because this area has been good to me, and I've always believed that what my father told me, the hand you give through is the hand you receive through. It's time for me to give back, and that is why I'm here today and bringing you the experience that I have to get things done. And if you look at my flyer, my past, you'll see that while I was able to serve, we were able to accomplish a great many things for the city that we're still enjoying today. So I'd like to be able to continue that. Again, I thank you for being here.
Our next candidate is Jacob Carr.
Good evening. Thank you for your time. I first want to say thank you to the League of Women and the City of Tarpon Springs for sponsoring this forum. Thank you for all that are here tonight that wanted to come and learn about our candidates that are running for the open seat. My name is Jacob Carr. I grew up on Banana Street just off Spring Bayou with my two sisters. I was blessed with two parents that instilled at a young age character and integrity. Growing up, I spent many days riding my bike throughout downtown, the Bayou, and out to the beaches of Sunset and Fred Howard Park, taking boat trips out to Anclote Island, and playing in the river and bayous. During my childhood, there were many trips with family and friends to some of our past restaurants in town, such as Mr. Bill's Donuts, Times Square Deli, Nick's Pizza, Danny K's, and out to the Sponge Docks. I attended elementary, middle, and high school here in Tarpon Springs. After grade school, I went on to St. Petersburg College, and then I transferred to the University of South Florida, where I earned my degree in business management. My experience on city board started at age 24, when I was first appointed to the Historic Preservation Board, which I served for 3 years. From there, I was appointed to the Planning and Zoning Board of Tarpon Springs, which I've served as vice chair for the past 3. After graduating college, my professional life, I worked with my father in the family business. From there, I moved on and managed an independent financial planning office, specializing in retirement planning. And today, I currently manage $450 million a year in spend in negotiations, contract management, and making recommendations for operational improvements for a national healthcare company headquartered in Clearwater. I look forward to sharing my passion for the future of this great town and to gain your confidence that I'm the right choice for the future of Tarpon Springs. Thank you.
Mr. Kafalis.
I am Tim Kafalis, a resident of Tarpon Springs for over 30 years. I would like to thank the city and the League of Women Voters for once again sponsoring this forum. I believe we have a great city, a beautiful city, and I want to see it grow and prosper and be inclusive of all people. I want Tarpon Springs to move forward in 2017, and I can devote the time to help. I have a bachelor's degree in business management and an AAS in accounting with some governmental accounting experience. I am a small business owner and dedicate most of my time as a volunteer in several organizations. I'm running in this election because we have a great city, and I want to help it become even greater. But I do have some areas of concern. Some of my concerns are the misuse of eminent domain, how key people are replaced in the future, infrastructure needs, transportation and traffic, code enforcement, and the city budget will grow in 2017 by $3 million. That's a major concern. I'm the only candidate not to accept contributions. I am totally self-funded. I am Tim Kafalis, and I would be honored to be your commissioner, and I will work to keep Tarpon Springs honest and to be your eyes and ears and voice in City Hall. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Our first question relates to something I've received a lot of questions up here having to do with using eminent domain, the question of using eminent domain, purchasing the Sun Bay Motel and an adjoining parcel to create a park, hiring an eminent domain attorney at $500 an hour. And I'm sure you're familiar with the issue and you know more of the details than I have just expounded on. But what is your stance or opinions or way of looking at these issues? And our first person now will be Mr. Carr.
So eminent domain is a tough situation. It's something you can't take lightly. Property rights as property owners is a very important aspect as a citizen of our town. What this really comes down to, it's really talking about the safety of our town. It's not just about an eminent domain situation. This is one of the issues that we're trying to address to increase the safety of downtown Tarpon and the bayous. The boards recently approved hiring an eminent domain attorney and an appraiser to do due diligence on one of the options that would be available to rectify an issue that's going on in downtown Tarpon and at the bayous. The main concern really that we're looking at here is improving the safety of our residents and creating an environment for our kids to play that is a safe environment where we don't have drug dealers and prostitution going on in our downtown areas along the bayous.
Mr. Kafalis?
Well, I was the only candidate that night to speak out against the eminent domain issue for the Sun Bay Hotel. You can't take it for safety issues. It has to be needed for a greater cause. The city has rejected other areas in the downtown for parks, one being next to the Acropolis restaurant that I presented twice and the chamber presented, as well as the arts, to build a park there. To say that you are going to take it for safety is under the state law is not legal. You have to have a greater use for it. I don't think that it's needed to have another park downtown, and I believe that the idea of a park is just a ruse to take the properties, both properties, and I do believe that Mr. Hoffman has plans that he presented that night on his lot that are going to exceed $3 million in his time frame to build a building there. To take it for this purpose is totally wrong, and it shows a misuse of power by our city commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. DiDonato?
I don't prefer the use of eminent domain for even public uses unless it's an absolute need of the community. I will tell you that where the library sits today, it was used at that time to establish our library. I will tell you that Live Oak Street was put in with eminent domain for public use. There are occasionally needs there. I believe that this is an option is the Sun Bay and the Hoffman property to look forward and look into the possibilities of a park. I think there are benefits there that some are aware of and some disagree with. I think that's a long going in the process to look at. The problem I see it mainly is the hotel, the Sun Bay Hotel. It's been a problem for well over 20 years that I know of. My own family stepdaughter had made me aware of it 20 years ago. It's probably been longer. He's been saying that he's going to take care of it. Nothing's happening, and I want to see it done. So this is a way to accomplish that.
Thank you. The next question is, what is your affiliation with our state and county officials, if any? And that would be Mr. Kafalis.
Well, I ran for county office a few years ago, and I got to know quite a few people by name at the county. And I did so because there was one candidate running that I did not want to see get elected. And I feel that I helped to prevent that person from getting elected. But to say, how do we have a close relationship? I think it's the position that has the relationship. So whoever is in the position will gain the trust of the county and the state officials, and I think that that's who they want to speak with, is who's the people in power.
Thank you. Mr. DiDonato.
I, through my dealings in prior history with this city, got to know many of the leaders of the county and the state and even the federal government. I believe that proved to be an asset for Tarpon Springs. When I first was elected mayor, many people told me we were the stepchild of Pinellas County, and the county ignored us. And I asked myself, why would that be? And I found when I went to the county and I talked to the commissioners, when I went to the state and I talked to representatives and the state senators, and I went to Washington and I talked to the federal people, every time this city has asked, those people have bent over backwards to try and help us to accomplish our goals. I believe that that relationship is still there. I talked to many of them frequently on speed dial. I believe we use that to help our community grow. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Carr?
Currently, I don't have any friends in those political offices, but I do not hesitate to reach out to them when I see a need and a concern. I know currently our current mayor has set up a relationship with the county to meet with them monthly to let them know what's going on in Tarpon Springs. I support that. I think that's a great idea because there's so many projects that go on throughout Tarpon Springs. As an example of our roads, we have a lot of state and county roads that go through our small town here, and the city isn't responsible for maintenance. The city isn't responsible for the sidewalks and not responsible for repaving. So unless we let them know about our roads that are in not very good condition and our roads that are ready to fall into the bayous in certain areas that are county roads, they're not going to make a difference. So I do think it's important to reach out to our state and county officials. I'm very good at networking. I don't have a problem with that. I do not hesitate to call the county at all when I see an issue that arises currently today.
Next question, Mr. DiDonato. The rocks on the bayou are bad, and the history of the issue was ignored. What will you do to fix it, and what about the other side where the trees are falling in the bayou? This somewhat relates to the comments about roads.
I was very disheartened by the finished product. I'm not a fan of the rocks. I'm one of my plans to bring through to the commission and hope to be accomplished would be a trail, a bike trail through town, around the bayou, out to the high school pool that we're building for the city, and out to our 2 beaches. I believe that can be done. I've talked to an engineer that believes it can be done, and I think we need to address it, and that will certainly take care of our riprap or our rock problem. As far as the part that needs to be done yet, you're exactly right. If anybody knows Buddy Alderman, he's no longer with us. A great man who tried to save most of those trees. Probably at least half of the trees he tried to save are already gone. So yes, we need to do something about it. Unfortunately, when the city chose to do their portion, the county was asked to do theirs as well, and they did not seek proper funding through the Army Corps of Engineers, and that's why that part is not done. But we are in talks, as I understand, with the county to work that out.
Mr. Carr?
Yeah, this is a tragedy, I think, for our town. It's a natural resource that has been really stripped, and we have an onshore break protection on our bayou that really shouldn't be there. This is a project that happened that didn't go to the Board of Commissioners or the Planning and Zoning Board or something along those lines. It went right through the Planning Department, and to me, it's not acceptable. When this first happened, I started a petition with a lot of individuals around town throughout the bayous. I presented it to the board about 1.5 years ago, and I asked for something to be done. This is an area where there's really a lack of sidewalks. It's a safety issue also. There's not one sidewalk that goes along South Spring Boulevard from the boat ramp to the bridge. There's multiple issues. I've proposed the idea of doing some type of boardwalk, not a wooden boardwalk, but something along that Dunedin has or Clearwater Beach has, where you could do around the bayous. There's not a continuous sidewalk around the bayous. There's not one crosswalk on the bayou. So we're looking at a safety concern for 1, the pedestrian, and then 2, the motorist. This is such a great resource we have here to attract people into our town, and I think it'd be a great idea to utilize it.
Mr. Kafalis?
Well, I agree it is unsightly, and it should never have been done that way. I don't know exactly what happened, how it got to that point. I know that there was some talk that we could build a sidewalk along there, even at this late date. I'd like to see that pursued, and I'd like to see it funded by the Army Corps of Engineers, as well as in conjunction with the city. I think that we've lost a tremendous asset by putting those big rocks there, and I think that something needs to be done to clean that up. I don't know if they can remove them or cover them and then put a sidewalk around it, but it is a tragic mess that they've made, and I think that we need to work to clean that up. Thank you.
Okay, also related to streets and roads and parking. One person said that there talks about empty storefronts, and somebody else said the new businesses are opening up, and which is creating a parking problem. You've seen it up close. What do you see, or are these compatible situations? I'm sorry. Mr.
Can I get clarification real quick? Are you
I'm
referring to
sorry, Mr. Carr would be
Are you
the
referring to
first.
downtown or the Sponge Docks or 19 or where is it referring to? Is anything specifically? Well, I'll refer to it how I see in town.
Okay, let me read the questions.
Okay.
As a Tarpon Springs resident, as well as a businessman, I'm interested in the seemingly large amount of empty storefronts, yet we see the continued land development for new businesses. What is your opinion as to this issue, and what plan or ideas do you have towards this issue? And then the other one is the downtown is starting to witness a parking shortage due to all the growth in restaurant, bar, and retail development. How would you fix this issue?
Sure. Growing up here, I've definitely seen downtown. It has made huge strides over the past few years. It's great to see the growth, and it's great to see more people in downtown at the restaurants and have other options throughout town. I have seen a parking issue. I grew up close to downtown, so I understand. There's two projects that have come into play. So there's one at the old utility waterworks building that the city owns that they're putting a parking lot in. That's one situation that the city's already working on. Number two, there's a parking lot along Court Street that runs towards Craig Park. That's going to be another 40 spaces there. So yes, there is a concern, but it's great to see that this is a concern that we have, because that means we're growing as a community and growing with businesses and people wanting to be in our downtowns. At some point, we're going to need to look at potentially a garage of some sort, but that's going to be way down the road, I think. But I would be open for talking and discussions and doing due diligence and seeing what that would actually require, funding and so on. Thanks.
Mr. Kafalis?
Well, there is a shortage at times, and I think that the Ring Avenue parking lot is scheduled to begin to be constructed soon, and I think that that will help alleviate some of the problem. And I think that we need to have better signage directing cars to where we have existing lots, like behind the Historical Society. That lot doesn't get filled as much as it should, and I think that that better signage would help direct cars to where there is a place to park. I think that we do have a problem, and I think that because we've changed in the last few years the requirements for business to have certain types of parking, depending on if it's a restaurant, how many seats, et cetera, I think that we need to look at that as well. But I think that we need to pursue other avenues. But again, I don't feel that taking anybody's property to build a park and then saying, well, we could also use it for a parking lot, because that was discussed that night too. I think that that's wrong. Thank you.
Mr. DiDonato?
Yes, as mentioned, there are already some projects that the city has planned to develop further parking, but it is a big need. I'm happy to see it. It means that the downtown area is becoming more and more successful. If we don't start planning for this stuff now, it's going to be very difficult in the future to get it done. That's one of my prime things. Any parking plans, park plans, period, we've got to start doing it today, because there's not any more land. So we've got a plan. One person told me today that if you give a guy a bucket of paint and go walk along and start striping spaces along the Court Street, for example, already until they do that project, Orange Street can be done. Parts of Tarpon Avenue and Pinellas Avenue, taking a bucket of paint and start painting some parking spots on that. The city could do that at a relatively low cost. But the point is, we need to get it done, and we need to get it done soon.
Okay, another side of transportation is those who don't have it. How would you improve public transportation to Tarpon, especially for the elderly? And this usually is, things like this are usually an issue often at the county level, but what can be done at the city level, if anything?
Am I first?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Kafalis.
Well, this has come up in past elections, and it is a problem. A lot of people choose not to drive. It's getting less affordable, and for seniors, a lot of them don't want to drive. And I think that we're getting ready in November to be looking at the pennies for Pinellas, and some of that money could be redirected to local transportation. And that would be a direct thing that we could do as a city, and have it put towards transportation and more routes and more crisscrossing routes. It was discussed in the past about having other types of, instead of big buses and things, maybe having vans. And I think that there's potential to have other types of transportation and to concentrate on working with the elderly as well as the youth that need to get to the college. And I see them getting off at the bus stop and having to cross US 19 from downtown, from various parts of Tarpon. Thank you.
Mr. DiDonato?
Yes. I believe that there has to be done by cooperation and planning with the county and the state. There was a time we had a service in Tarpon Springs called the Neighborhood Senior Citizens Center that was funded primarily, I believe, through the state and the county. They used our facility at the gym and rec building over on across from the fire department, but that the funding was depleted there. I believe that with planning, maybe it's possible to work with the county and the state to bring a program like that back. I know the mayor has been working on it as well. I don't know where he is with his progress there, but if we wanted the PSTA to do it, it's going to cost more funding for our taxpayers. So we need to try and consider that, but also look into maybe reestablishing some programs for the seniors that will provide that service as well.
Mr. Carr?
Our demographics have a 12.5% seem to be our very seasoned, mature age group above the 75 range. The next thing we're looking at one of the greatest generations getting ready to retire, and we're going to have a huge influx at some point moving into the state of Florida, it being an attraction for people to move here from other states. I do agree that we need to do something. And I know the mayor is working on projects also currently today with having some type of transportation for the seniors, if it's a central hub that we could, people could be picked up or so on. But we do have to work and hold the public transport, the PSTA accountable. We pay them a large amount of money from the state of from the city of Tarpon Springs already, and we do need our services here in our city. So that's one thing I would recommend is working with the county in that aspect to get what we are already paying out of them.
Thank you. Okay. I believe that the old Stouffer property is in Tarpon Springs, and the question is, what should be done with the contaminated Stouffer Superfund site? And the first person for that would be Mr. DiDonato.
That is a federal and state project. It certainly needs to be watched, and I believe there's other solutions that can work there. It has a lot of possibilities. I know they've talked about putting a 9-hole golf course. They talked about putting marina, but it's certainly limited to what can go on there because of the contamination, and I think that we certainly need to proceed cautiously. But again, that would require cooperation with the city communicating with the state and federal government.
Mr. Carr?
Yes, I would imagine most people are pretty familiar with the site in town if you've been here for quite some time. It's a great opportunity, I think, to bring in some type of business into town. We can't build houses on it for some time, it's many years down the road, but that's something we could work with the economic developer about attracting a business. There's a large need for a boat ramp in town and other marine areas too. So this would be a really good spot for some type of business to help the boating community. If it's a restaurant tied in with a boat marina, or if it's I think really the boat ramp would really be probably the best serve right now, but I'm open to other options too, working with the economic developer.
Mr. Kapalis?
Well, in past elections, I've said we need to stay the heck away from it. The reason it's polluted is underneath the ground, it's phosphorus. When it's exposed to the air and water, it explodes. It's a product that's similar to what is used in phosphorus bombs, and when they would hit and they would go over and over and explode repeatedly. And if we expose that, take that cap off, that crown off of it, they stopped moving trying to remove it years ago when Congressman Mike Bilirakis got the funding because they found it was too dangerous to remove it. So capping it was the only outlet to do. putting a boat ramp there or anything there that would jeopardize that, that seal would be very dangerous, could be a liability, a major liability for the city, and we don't need that. Now, some of the slag that was taken from that was put at the Anclote River and at the park, and at one point it was determined there and at Sizzler Field that it was slightly radioactive. We don't need to be doing anything with that, other than maybe a solar field would there be on the surface and not penetrating the soil.
Okay, Mr. Carr, there's another pollution situation. If this questioner is correct, what responsibilities does the city have to clean up the lead in the city's pipes that leach into our water?
Sure, that's a great question. The majority of our houses in Tarpon were built before 1977. So a lot of the houses in themselves have copper piping, and when copper piping, you're connecting copper piping, you're using the lead to connect copper pipes. So in itself, our own houses, with the age of them, are also putting pollutants into our water system when we're bringing it into the house. One thing that I am encouraged by, that we have our own water fields and our own water plant. And one thing that we do have, we have state regulations. But one thing that I would stand behind is we would have a much more stringent keeping an eye on the levels of what's going on out of our water plant, because there's well fields that individuals have, their residential homes, that they can't pull water from anymore because they have arsenic in their well fields in that area. So it is important that we have our own city water, but it's also important that we document and keep an eye on this very, very tightly, above what regulation says even.
Mr. Kafalis?
Yes, it is a concern, and it's my understanding that each day that they have to adjust the chemical rates at the the RO plant, and that impacts the amount of lead that's released from our homes and from the pipes and into the system. Many of the houses have lead in them, and it's unfortunate. I think that it was highlighted when Flint was found to have such a problem with it. I don't think it's to that level, and I think we need to be cautious how we proceed with that so we don't get seen as jumping the gun and on that until we see what can be done to contain it. At one point, the lines need to be looked at. The sewer lines were lined years ago, and so there shouldn't be a problem with the sewer lines at this point. Thank you.
Mr. DiDonato?
Yes, I believe that's an important issue. The city certainly is responsible in that realm, and I think that's why the city stepped forward to build its own water plant. It also took the pressure off as far as having to negotiate for our water with a third party. I'm very proud of that facility. I would ask any of you who have not toured it to tour it. They inspect that water each and every day and make whatever adjustments that need to be made. And I know the water coming out of the water plant is better than the water we were getting prior to that. If any of you have ever lived on the end of a canal, for example, how things start to box up and settle in the back of the channel. We were on the end of the line in our water line, and I would tell you that while it was safe and tested all the time, today's water coming out of our plant is a higher grade than what we were getting before. But the city has to remain on top of that, and again, tour the plant is phenomenal. It's a state-of-the-art plant.
Okay, Mr. Kafalis. Apparently, as many communities do, there are homeless people in Tarpon Springs. And many people are trying to deal with this sort of thing. Lots of ideas. What are your ideas for dealing, or what would be the role of city government in dealing with the homeless?
Well, I think the city government has done a good role with working with various agencies like the Shepherd Center and the various churches that help with that. I think there isn't enough housing. And I used to be the director of public housing in Tarpon Springs years ago, and we had trouble getting funding to maintain the properties. Now they're being totally rehabbed, so maybe that will help with some of the homeless issues once they're all completed and rehoused. We do have homeless advocates in the city, and I served back in the early 90s on the Homeless Coalition with the Salvation Army, and back then they tried desperately to try to get more involvement from the community. And I think that it's time. It's becoming an issue. And I think that it's something that has to be resolved, and we need to decide. I also know that we have one of the 5 most poverty-stricken areas in the county, and nobody seems to ever address that.
Mr. DiDonato?
I don't know if any of you have been down Safford lately, but the Housing Authority has revamped those old apartments there. It's state of the art. It's very, very nice. So we are working on the problem. We are aware of it. It's a matter of trying to provide housing, but also providing food and clothing. I know the Shepherd Center, I happen to serve on their board, and they're very active in trying to pull that through. The Ministerial Alliance in our city is very good at working and trying to help the homeless. The police department has an officer that's assigned directly to actually knowing those people and monitoring that problem, and he's there to help them out. We can increase that more, but it needs to be a community effort, and we need to all work together. And that would help to remedy the problem.
Mr. Carr?
Sure. This is a problem that we have throughout our town. Growing up in downtown area, I saw it when I was a younger child. I see it when I'm at my parents' house. You have the homeless walk by. They're in our parks. They're in our businesses, going to the bathroom on the doors and so on. So this is an issue that really needs to be addressed. We need to have compassion for our fellow man. That's important. But we also need to hold our areas to standards that we're not going to accept homelessness on our streets. We need to get them the help they need. So we're not going to allow the homeless to do this to our businesses and to do this to our parks. So in some way, we need to find a way to get the help they need. If it's working with the police department and adding an additional officer to get them to the county help they could use to get off the streets. But really, we need to respect our business owners also, because that's really what it's coming down to when we have homeless throughout our streets. And if I don't feel comfortable with my wife walking in the park with our dog at night because of the homelessness and the safety issues, I think there's an issue with that with our residents.
Okay. Mr. DiDonato? We read a lot about, hear a lot about climate change and the effects that it's going to be having, especially where communities are close to the water. Related to that, would you advocate and support for more efforts to use solar on city buildings?
I absolutely would. I believe that Florida should be the leader in the United States of America. We're the Sunshine State, for as an example. It makes no sense to me that we haven't pursued solar more efficiently and profoundly than we have. I hope that the state certainly does that, but the cities need to start pushing those ideas and working it. I was very happy to see this past amendment fail. To me, that was a con job by the power companies. I'm sorry to say that, but it's the truth. But we need to work our solar, and the city should be an involved member in that in every way we can.
Mr. Carr?
Climate change is pretty evident. We're here on a coastal town. We've got many, many miles of coastal waterfront. 1 year ago today, I had the bayou in my front yard because of a high tide due to a cold front that came through. That wasn't the case growing up. There is an evidence that the tides are rising in some aspects. I'm totally for solar. I think it's an important aspect. It's renewable. It's green, renewable, and it's something we could rely on for many generations. Thanks.
I think I already stated that one good purpose for the Stauffer plant might be to put solar out there where it would take little impact to the property, and it would be a good source to, maybe they can figure out how to run the power to the power plant that's already there nearby. I believe it's Lockheed Martin in Oldsmar that built a parking garage, and on their roof they put solar panels. So if we start talking about a parking garage or maybe something along those lines for downtown, maybe that would be a good goal, to have solar on the roof to help generate energy to help offset what we use. But I think that should be up to a joint effort between private sector and the government. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Carr? We have some questions about the city finances. What is your opinion on the appropriate reserve level the city should keep? If you think that this, if there's a surplus, what would you do with those surplus funds?
Sure. Currently today, the way the charter is written, we need to have 20% of our general budget in reserves. That would be around $4.4 million. Today we're estimated to have $8.8 million in reserves in 2017 of the fiscal year. These reserves are really an important part to our city. In the event we have a natural disaster or something happens to our town, we're able to dip into these reserves and really be there for our residents the next day and not have to wait on federal funding and other aspects. We need to evaluate it year over year on how much we're putting in the reserves. I think right now we're maintaining at a great level, but also our budget's growing too, so that's going to continue to grow. The options, there are many options we could look at if it's capital improvement items throughout the town, from sidewalks to roads or parking garages or other aspects. So there's many different ideas that we could do with surplus of the funds, but it's important to have these funds where they're at today.
Mr. Kafalis?
Well, a couple of years ago, we had somewhere around 10 point something million, and it dropped to 8 million. Now it's back up to about 8.8, I believe. I believe that we should not lower our reserves down to that 20% level. St. Petersburg went below that level, and it caused a lot of problems for them, and because it's a self voted limit. But I also remember back many years ago, before most of us in this room were alive, the city defaulted on a bond issue. And I would not want to see that happen with the current bond issue that's out there and any debts that we've created in the last couple of years. So it would be wise to retain that. Also, we've had some major water line breaks and sewer line breaks that cost extremely a lot to fix. I think we need to retain as much of those millions of dollars that are there to protect our residents, protect our properties, and to make sure that the future does have reserves.
Thank you. Mr. DiDonato?
We recognized many years ago that the reserve system was the only sure hard way to ensure that the services at the level that we were currently at were going to be maintained. Plus, as mentioned here, also emergencies come up that you really can't plan for, but you have to have the funding to take care of. When I left office, it was in the double figures, so it indeed has gone down some. But I don't think 20% is enough. When the recession happened and cities and municipalities throughout this county and state were laying off people and not filling jobs, I'm proud to say that Tarpon was able to pay its workers and continue its services. Little, if any, was cut in a drastic level to the citizens. So the reserve, the surplus, is extremely important, and it has to be guarded well.
Thank you. The next question for Mr. Kafalis. It's sort of the flip side of that last question. Do you think our millage, our tax millage, millage rate is appropriate for a full-service city?
Well, our budget increased by over $3 million, right around $3 million with a lowered millage rate. So I think as the values go up, I think that we need to look at possibly lowering the millage rate. If we give $3 million more to the city, they're going to spend $3 million. Next year, it might be they will spend $4 million. I think that we need to watch that, and I think in the past, the city grew to the expectations of revenue, and I think that, again, we need to watch the millage rate, and we need to make sure that we're not wasting the money just because we have it.
Mr. DiDonato?
At one time, we were right in the middle of the millage rates, pretty much in the county, or 26 municipalities. We are now going back up to the 4 and 5 area. I personally think as we succeed with the increased values, we need to try and drop that level down some, but we've got to do it the right way. We've got a plan, and so that we can still get our services done and taken care of. But I believe that taxes are a burden to all of us. It's a necessary burden, but it's one that we must plan before we reduce. But I do think, as this past commission did, that lowering is the direction to go at this point in time. but certainly you have to be careful in the structure the way you do that so you don't lose your service levels.
Mr. Carr?
Our current millage rate is at 5.42% mils. The Board of Commission decreased it for the first time in 8 years. And before that, it stayed stagnant from 2011 to 2016. It's been mentioned that our revenue has gone up because our property values has increased. That's an important aspect. Also, before it was increased in the 2010 range, it was stayed level in the mid-4s for quite some time. So being a full-service city, it's important to have the funds there available to be continuing to be a full-service city. But we also need to evaluate what's best for our residents, too. We're one of the top cities in the county on the highest millage rate, so we do need to address it. I think there's an opportunity to reduce it even further, but that's going to be evaluated when the budget comes back around. Thanks.
Okay, will you make it a priority to apply for a Florida Community Trust grant to fund the purchase of the Walmart property? Mr. DiDonato?
I certainly think at this time that is appropriate. 16 years ago, I had a little different opinion, but at the time we needed to increase our tax base. I'm happy to say that we've gotten some major development since then, both in subdivisions and residencies, but also in business, such as the Reload project. Walmart ended up taking over the Kmart. We've got other projects on board now that help our tax base. I firmly believe that if we're going to preserve our greenland, we need to start buying it. I've said earlier today that I think parks need to be considered, and certainly that site could be a very beautiful site as well.
Mr. Carr?
Yeah, I support it. I'm not against it. It's a beautiful piece of property in town. It's really important to take advantage of the grants that are available to us as a city. There's many grants that are offered by the state and government, and any opportunity we have to take advantage of it, I'm supporting that to see our town continue to be a great place to be.
Mr. Kafalis?
I believe the property is about 74-point-something acres, and I also know that it's the second or third highest tax-paying property tax base in the city. And if we take it off the rolls, we better have another way to make up that revenue. And I'm not against making it a trust and putting it into a nature preserve or something, but I think we need to look more seriously at what we will do without that revenue. And I think we need to set parameters that are permanent and defined so that somebody can't come down the road in the future and say, well, we don't need it for this anymore, let's do something else with it. And I think that I came up with the idea a few years ago to make a water education facility there along the Anclote, and funding would have been available, and maybe even getting Walmart to help with that and make them a partner in the effort. Thank you.
Okay, well, we're talking about money. What impact fees would you delete or add or modify, if any? And that would be Mr. Carr.
Sure. I recently had a friend that started building a house off Rose Tree, and he called me. He goes, Jacob, I cannot believe I'm paying close to $10,000 in impact fees. This is ridiculous. What is the deal? I've talked to my friends that have developed in other towns, and they're like $2,000 or $3,000. What's going on? And to me, I was shocked. I was like, this is a lot of money we're doing. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, about 8 different impact fees that come through. We're looking at a water impact fee of $2,100, a police impact fee of $500, recreation impact fee of $1,000, transportation impact fee of $2,000. So if I were to look at these, I would say probably the transportation would be one. Water and sewer, I think those could be reduced also. It's important to have impact fees, but I think it needs to be also an important aspect to, if someone's willing to call Tarpon Springs home and wants to build a nice house here, they should have the opportunity to do that without being price gouged.
Mr. Kafalis?
Well, I disagree. I don't think we should cut any of the impact fees unless you want to start cutting services. The idea of impact fees are that they are to help offset the impact that property is going to have on parks, transportation, police, fire, water, everything else. To cut any of them, I think, would be dangerous, and I think it would set a precedent to to people that built in the past and said, wait, I just paid my $10,000 that Mr. Carr spoke about, and now someone's going to pay $5,000. Years ago, I worked for MI Homes selling homes for them over in Hillsborough County, and it started out one day they were at $2,500, and the next day they went up to $4,500 or $4,800. The only thing I can say about the impact fees is that we have to make sure it's consistent, that it's used appropriately, not borrowed out of those funds and used for other things. Because sometimes the city has a habit of putting funds into other areas and then borrowing the money out. I think they should be dedicated for the purpose for which they were collected. Thank you.
Mr. DiDonato?
I don't like the idea of impact fees, but I understand the concept, and I would walk softly. I do feel that they are too high. It's a burden on a homeowner to build a home and have to put $10,000 up front that they probably didn't even think they were going to have to pay, and certainly to commercial building as well. I would like to see if we could look at lowering some of those areas, but I would agree with Tim that you'd have to really go softly, because what that does is catch them into the pot that we've all been paying into for 30 and 40 years and 10 years and 50, whatever, how long you've been here. It spreads the cost, but it's certainly getting to be on the high side. I would agree with that. We should look at it, but I don't think we should get rid of them. We should maybe lower them.
Okay, Mr. Kafalis. Okay, would you advocate or support the creation of an environmental advisory board to review all building projects, both residential and commercial, with regard to impacts to habitat and wildlife?
Well, to some point, I think it's already done, but I believe that we should have some kind of an environmental, study which is done with trees and things like that, and they may have to check for gopher tortoises and other things. I think that we could start something like that, but I think it would be dangerous depending on who is controlling that function. I think that we need to go softly with that, and because somebody could come along and say, oh, well, let's restrict them from building on Walmart, but then somebody else comes along and says that somebody's friend that might be on that board, oh, no, it won't be an environmental issue to do that, so let's go ahead and let them. So I think that needs to be very seriously looked at, and permanent rules of who sits on that committee and what their actions are, and if the city commission is going to have to abide by that when they allow or disallow functions. Thank you.
Mr. DiDonato?
I would certainly be in favor of that. I think we have to start watching our environment. That's becoming more and more evident to me every day, and I hope it is to you. I know the Budget Advisory Committee, for example, has done a good job over the years, which I'm proud to be a member. It's been helpful to the commission. I believe that the Environmental Advisory Group could be of equal importance in helping to monitor some situations. It should be in fairness and not become political, such as Tim was alluding to. But yeah, we need to start doing everything we can to protect this environment. So absolutely.
Yep.
Mr. Carr?
Protecting the environment is an important aspect. Today, I've sat on volunteer boards for the city for about 7 years now, and one of the issues that have repeatedly happened over and over again is absenteeism and getting quality people to be on these boards. So when you, as the applicant, come in front of the Planning and Zoning Board, for instance, this has happened multiple times in this past year, we might have someone that's not on the, we don't have enough to have a forum or quorum. So at that point, the project has to be pushed a whole nother month because the volunteers that were appointed by the commission weren't showing up to do their jobs. So I'm not against this at all. I think it might be a good idea to tack this along to another board that's currently in place today where we have volunteers. And then maybe that would attract some additional qualified individuals that have passion for our town to sit on this board as well. And then we might not have issues with absenteeism. Thanks.
Next question, Mr. DiDonato. There's some talk about modifying or amending existing zoning restrictions. Where do you stand on that issue? What are your thoughts on the zoning restrictions?
I'm not sure the direction of that question, but that's been done and looked at over the years. There's sometimes circumstances that you you don't foresee happening that do happen later. So is there a need to sometimes change them? Yes, but it has to be really monitored, because you don't just change willy-nilly and just for political reasons or any other. You do them for the best and the environment of our community. So I would walk lightly on changing them, but I would not say that doesn't need to be looked at. For example, people in our community have talked about a hotel downtown. Currently, the zoning or for that would be medium density, which means they could have 30 units per acre. Most hotels are going to want at least pretty close to 100. So that's something I foresee that does need to be moderated. If you want a decent hotel, that's going to have to be looked at. So it does happen, yes.
Mr. Carr?
I'm not against zoning changes at all. I mean, that's your aspect as a property owner and as a business owner to request a property zone change. There is another layer of protection. There's a future land use that's put in by the county and city. So although you may have changed the zoning, you're still protecting of the citizens and of the city with the future land use map also.
Mr. Kafalis?
Well, I think that we constantly have to look at those issues. We have a changing society, changing needs, changing costs, and we need to look at constantly, and we have in the past. And I think that it has to be looked at very strictly on each count. And I think it's kind of an open-ended question to amend it higher or lower. What are we looking for? Are we looking for hotels in the middle of Spring Bayou area, or a major hotel, or what are we talking about? I think it would be difficult to say I'm in favor or I'm against. I think that we constantly have to look at that, and I think the city does at this time, and I think that we will see changes in the future, and I think as our society changes, we will see changes in need that will bring about the zoning changes.
Mr. Carr? This question has to do with doing away with the Tarpon Springs Police Department. What would be your reaction to that idea?
Safety is, I think, one of the major concerns that we have in our town, but we have to have our police department here to protect our town. We have to provide the tools necessary for them to be one of the best police departments in the state, and we have to provide the training for that too. So I'm not for that. I want the police department here, and I think it's an important aspect to have a city police department to protect our residents.
Mr. Cavallis?
Well, I'm very much in favor of our local police department. During the last election when I ran, somebody erroneously put on Facebook that I was against and I was going to try to get rid of the police department. Totally erroneous, totally misleading, and I think that we have a very fine police department, and we give them the tools they need, and we will in the future. And I think that they have proven their professionalism. This morning, as I was at a chamber meeting when they discussed outside alcohol, and it was very professionally handled. They brought in alcohol and tobacco to discuss it as well, and 2 officers were there, and I think it went quite well. And I've seen more and more professionalism, and I am 100% in support of our police department, as which was wrongly stated in the last election. I am 100% behind it.
Mr. DiDonato?
I too am behind our police department. I believe in community policing. I'm aware of commissioners and people who live in other cities without their own police force, and I will tell you that most of them tell me they miss them. So I think it's important. It is a major cost to the taxpayers of this community, but it's a very important function, and I think we should keep it. And in fact, we felt so strongly about it in the past that I was in office when we passed a referendum that says that decision will be made by you, the public, if it's ever made. It will not be made by politicians. But I would certainly plead that we maintain our own police and fire department. So I'm for keeping them.
Mr. Kafalis? Tarpon Springs is famous for the sponge docks, the sponge divers, but it's also famous and well known for the high school band. And that the high school band here is a result of public education. Would you comment on the schools in Tarpon Springs, many of which are part of the county school system. I'm not familiar enough to know about others, but would you just comment on the schools in Tarpon?
Well, we have a very good school system. Most of our schools in the last, I'd say, 3 to 5 years have all been rebuilt, and the elementary schools as well as the high schools. And we've expanded to culinary arts at the due to some donations that were made, as well as some funding at the former site of Sunset Hills when they were moved down below to the other site. We have very new schools, as new just about as it can be, and we're very fortunate. As far as the high school band, we are extremely fortunate. I believe it was last year's Macy's Parade. They performed in it, and I understand also it's pretty much self-funding. I'm not 100% sure of that, but I like that even better if that's the case. And they are very professional, and they put on a tremendous performance for us, and they represent Tarpon quite well. I think we are very fortunate to have the schools we have, and I think that we've worked closely through the officer resource programs to work with the county and with the schools to make sure we maintain a quality level for the students. Thank you.
Mr. DiDonato?
I would concur. My own children went to schools in Tarpon Springs. I know a great many teachers and leaders of the schools here. I know the programs, such as the band program, bar none, it's one of the best in the country, not just the state of Florida. That tremendous leadership that they're providing that program as well. The culinary arts program at the high school is also another leader in the state. In the veterinarian program are all special programs that are leaders in this state. So can it be better? Yes, everything can get better. And do we all need to come together and help as much as we can to make it better? Yes, we do. But we are blessed. It is a good school system. Without teachers, this country would be in trouble, I believe. I think they deserve more professionalism and more pay. But again, that's a county and state situation. But yes, our schools are good, and I would tell anybody that moved to this community and be proud of it. Yes.
Mr. Carr?
I'm a product of elementary, middle, and high school in Tarpon Springs. It's an important part. The high school band is an asset here in Tarpon Springs that not many communities have. It's great to go watch them at a hometown football game, to see them at the Christmas parade. I was on the Martin Luther King parade this week, and I participated in that, and the drumline marched along that parade also. So it's good to see them out in the community. So this is a band that regularly finishes #1 in Indianapolis and the country, and it's something to be proud of, I think. Do I think we could recognize them more? I think so. But yeah, overall, I love our schools here. It's a county and state situation, but if we could support them with additional programs through the city to give children opportunities to learn more about our town, like the internships and so on, I think that would be an important part to do.
Okay, Mr. DiDonato, would you consider attending the Florida League of Cities or the National League of Cities annual convention?
Yes, I would. I haven't as yet, but I would definitely do that because I know now what they have learned when going to those meetings. I have been to some league meetings, but not officially. It has a tremendous function. It helps they have a program, for example, to help incoming commissioners or leaders of their communities. They help train them and prepare them. They do many other things, such as lobbying and other things for our cities. So yes, I would definitely do that. I would recommend that all commissioners do that. It's proven to me through others that it is a great way to learn to be a better and more responsible commissioner. So yes.
I'll echo that. Yes, I would be for that. I think it's a great opportunity. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel and go upstream when we can learn from others and best practices in other communities also.
Mr. Cavella?
Yes, I went to one annual convention back whenever I was the director of public housing. They were involved in our insurance. They were withholding $300,000 from a sinkhole property because they didn't want to pay it. And when I went to that meeting and met with the board, I was able to get them to release the money to be used for other property enhancements. But they were fighting us on that after the properties had been demolished because they were endangering people to live there. But so I do think that it's important that we go, and I think it's important that we have regular representation at the conventions. And I think that we need to designate the proper people to be there and people with a positive attitude to help Tarpon.
Okay, Mr. Carr, we've covered a lot of issues. I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to raise an issue and question and address it, and then the other two will address the same question, and I'll give each of you an opportunity to bring up an issue like that.
Sure. I think one of the issues is we've got a river here that's a huge asset to our community. It affects many, many millions of dollars in our town of tourism, business, and so on. One thing I do support is the dredging of our Anclo River. It's an important asset to our community. It needs to be done. It's done every 25 years, 20 to 25 years, and so I do support that. The city has currently worked with the county commission in raising funds. They've pushed for the BP funds, but that didn't pass. But they were able to get in the county budget for the year. It's around $300 to do due diligence and studies and so on. And then that aspect, I will continue to support the relations with the Army Corps of Engineers and our federal government to appropriate the funds necessary to dredge this area of town along the river.
Mr. Kafalis?
To
The
respond to his
same issue.
same issue. Well, yes, I think it's important that we maintain the river and the access to it, keep the dredging done. We are a safe port during major storms, which I don't know that a whole lot of people realize. And I think we are a very well-balanced community with that respect, and we need to maintain the water as far as navigation, and we need to make sure that the boats are safe that are coming in, and that we can maintain a safe place for them as well as deep enough water for them. We need to have safe ports for them and a good docking area for them to come into.
I absolutely support the dredging of the river. It's a little upsetting to me because the term is called maintenance dredging. That, I don't know about you, but when you maintain your home, you plan periodically to do certain projects to take care of it. I'm at a loss as to why it's always so difficult to get funding. I was involved with the last dredging of the river, and it took a long time. So I think we need to establish a permanent disposal site, for example. That will be harder to find in the future. Not only is our river important to us, our bayous are equally important, or almost as important as far as most of us consider it. And that needs to be dredged periodically. So we need a permanent site. We can't keep trying to look to lease here or there, because sooner or later we're going to run out of land, people. We got to start planning. So yes, it's very important, but we need to get our state and federal government in line with the word and term of maintenance. And there needs to be a plan, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, a 15-year plan, where this is checked and communities don't have to beg for the funding once every 20 years.
Okay, Mr. Kafalis, an issue that you don't feel we haven't addressed yet that you'd like to bring up, or one that you'd like to expand on?
Well, the eminent domain issue is a very tragic one. That took place last week, was very inappropriate. It shows a commission that was using their power, I believe, that by seeking to take these properties, both property owners came to the meeting, and one had not been told about it till shortly before, maybe a few days before, and he brought his plans for what he would like to do with that lot, and at some point in time he's going to build about a $3.5 million building on it. To take it because there's crime on it is not allowed under the law, and we have to give our police, as I said that night, we need to give them the tools to solve the problem. If we take it because there's crime and we say it's for a park, it's still going to be because there's crime. There's crime in other areas. Why didn't we take the property where the officer conduit was shot? And why didn't we start at that point? I'm not in favor of taking that property. I'm not in favor of taking any property for that reason. I think we need to look at eminent domain and see the damage it does to our community and the distrust it causes.
Thank you. Mr. DiDonato.
Again, as I said earlier on a similar question, I prefer not to use the eminent domain for either reason. one of them's been taken away legally. You can't do it for a nuisance. You can only do it for a public cause. That makes it a little easier. I would not for the taking of Mr. Hoffman's property. I will say on record, whatever we can do to remedy the property at Sun Bay, I'm for, because it's a major problem in this community and it should be taken care of. I believe through negotiations, most things can happen without that. And in fact, in the past, when eminent domain was looked at, people were given values of their property, and most of them chose to sell. So again, they aren't making any more land. There are occasions where you need to use it, but you walk softly with that, and that's the way I would proceed.
Mr. Carr?
Along the lines, I would much rather negotiate with an individual instead of using the right of eminent domain. Eminent domain strikes fear into the residents of the town. In certain areas, you don't necessarily know what's going to happen. Can you take my property, etc., if you're taking this property? So in the stance, I would much rather use negotiation for a purchase of a property. I think the second issue that was brought up also is a safety concern. We have 3 nuisance properties in town that have been nuisance properties for over 20 years. You're not going to find someone more passionate than myself. I parked next to the Sun Bay Hotel throughout my high school life. Throughout college, my parents live across the street, and they still live across the street today. They live in a beautiful historic bungalow, and they've got a drug house across the street that the city has allowed to go on for many, many years. There's multiple drug houses that are going on for many, many years. The issue is we have to address these somehow. If it's working with the economic developer and looking at alternative uses, that's fine. But we need to figure out a way to get rid of these drug houses and clean up the downtown bayou areas.
Okay, Mr. DiDonato, your issue.
I have a great many issues. We've discussed most of them this evening. I'd like to offer something on a more positive light and a recreational and a health-wise light. As some of you know, I've proposed, as others have suggested, that we have a bike trail from Safford. Actually, that's in the comp plan that would be done. It has not been addressed. I believe that trail could serve many, many functions. For example, the city's building a pool at the high school. I believe that it would have greater use if a viable trail was there for the kids to get to, a safe trail. So I believe that that's an important issue. I think it has positives for our city. As I said, it's in the comp plan. It's been planned for many, many years. And I think it's starting to, if I could put an addendum on that, I would say that a lot of times we talk about things, but we don't do them. When I first came into office, I was given, you can't do that because there's no funding. Because I believe you find a way. There are ways to make solutions, and that's what I want to do for the city.
Mr. Carr?
Recreation is very important to me. Recreation affects all age groups, if it's kids or if it's elderly or anyone in between. I know as I went to high school, we had bonfires out at Sunset Beach during homecoming. I thought that was a great thing to do. Again, I mentioned earlier that I had a petition I presented to the Board of Commissioners about 1.5 years ago to put in some type of sidewalk, boardwalk around the bayou areas for a safer area for people to come visit. This would be a great attraction for people to come into our town for the day, walk the bayous, bike out to the beaches, and then go home or have dinner afterwards before they go home. Also, that affects the Little Leagues. I played Little League here with some of the commissioners and some of your kids that are out in the audience today. There's parking issues at our Little League fields currently today also, and there's also parking issues at our football and soccer fields too. So we do need to look at some other alternatives there too that needs to be brought up for recreation. So recreation covers a wide range of things, but I'm completely for recreation in the city of Tarpon Springs.
Mr. Kafelis?
Well, recreation has not been something that we've underdone in Tarpon, and I think we should be proud of what we have. We have the various sites all around Tarpon that are parks, are recreational areas, are the senior along the trail there, the park there, with the workouts tools. I think that we've done plenty for the recreation. I think we can never do enough, but again, that should be done through the impact fees and what funds are available, the impact that people make on it by their building and expanding the use of things should come from that. We have we have beaches that are well used, and we have parks that are well used. In each community, including mine, I live at Oakleaf Village. There's a park there for the kids, and I've seen them at various places all over the city. I think we are well represented in the recreation department, and I think we should be proud of it.
Thank you. Mr. Carr, would you support the city creating its own municipal electric corporation to provide electric service to its residents, as it's done in Gainesville and other municipalities in Florida?
I don't know enough about that to talk about it right now, but at first stance, I would probably say no. I think there would be a pretty large capital expenditure to do that, and the upkeep and maintenance would be pretty large also. I do believe that we need to hold our power companies more responsible in the bills and the fees that they're charging us today, but that's something I would need to do more research on.
Mr. Cafellas?
Well, I would agree. I don't think that would be wise at this time to be doing that. An electric company is a tremendous thing. Most of them are authorities, and they would buy the power from other sources, whether it be Duke or other places. So I think we may end up just adding another level of government and taxation on the electric. I think we'd be better off finding a place for the solar and sell them the energy and work at trying to produce the energy that would help offset some of the city expenses, including, again, if we do a parking garage someday, maybe a roof that's solar paneled. Thank you.
Mr. DiDonato?
That issue has actually been addressed in the past. The city actually a former city manager looked at both the electric side of it, doing our own electricity, and the garbage side of it. Both were determined very upfront, expensive cost. I don't feel that it's almost like reinventing the wheel. Am I a big Duke Energy fan? I'm sorry, I'm really not, for my own personal reasons. But am I an electric fan? Yeah, I like electricity in my house. But I don't know that that's affordable for communities right now. They're dealing with pensions that many of them can't handle real well and into the future. So there's a lot of financial problems on a city, and I think to add more burden ultimately falls on you, the taxpayer. So I would not be in favor of that at this time. The garbage was almost viable, but it was still a lot of upfront cost. So no.
Okay, we have about 15 minutes left, and we've covered a lot of questions, and I'm going to make an executive decision. We'll do the final round, but I'll give you 2 minutes instead of 1 minute. Anybody object to that?
No.
Okay, so that we'll do reverse order of our starting, so that means that Mr. Cafellas would go first with the final statement.
This is our closing.
This is your closing statement, and you have 2 minutes instead of 1 minute.
Okay. Well, first of all, again, I want to thank everybody that came tonight, took the time to come here, and I also want to thank everybody that's watching it on TV. And I want to, again, discuss the eminent domain issue. But first, I am asked, why do I want to get involved and go through this process? I did so because I want to see Tarpon Springs be more resident and business friendly and more inclusive of all residents. Last week was a perfect example of our city commission abusing their power and a few in power pandering to special interests. The commission has proposed to force the eminent domain two property owners to sell the city their property. Neither property owner wishes to sell. Both have stated their desire to move forward and improve their property. In architect Ed Hoffman's case, to fulfill a 22-year dream of building a multi-million-dollar building on his lot at the end of Tarpon Avenue. I am the only candidate that spoke out against taking those properties during last week's vote, and yes, all three of us were in the audience. In fact, two main financial supporters of my opponents are speaking out in favor of the city taking these properties. Even the Chamber of Commerce is against taking the properties. I am asking for your vote and for you to keep active in your community and to send a message to those who abuse power. There is a saying, you can't fight City Hall. I believe you shouldn't have to. I want to thank everybody who took the time to come. Again, I'll say it, and I think it's very important for you to be active in your community, and I want your vote, and I need your vote to be elected this year. I'm very supportive of our city. This is my this is not my first time of running, and in the last election, the erroneous statement that was made, I feel contributed to about the police interest, added to my defeat, and I think that we need to look at that and see why people do those things and see why there's hidden agendas and why people want to take properties from other people. Is it so they can give it to somebody else? Thank you.
Mr. Carr.
Thanks. Appreciate everyone showing up tonight and everyone's watching on TV. I really have a passion for this town. I grew up here, and I really want to see it continue to grow in the direction that's going. To cover a couple of things that weren't covered on the questions, there's many great questions asked. One thing I want to make sure is that we continue to support the hospital here in Tarpon Springs. It's a good thing to have here in Tarpon. They're getting ready to invest about $15 million into the hospital emergency room, which about $5 million comes from the community itself. So it's going to be a community raised $5 million and a total of 15. So again, another thing that I want to point out too is our city boards. We have a lot of great city boards, but I think we need to prepare and give the tools for our board members to make an educated decision. If it's city policy or if it's just more about understanding what you're actually doing on the board, that's an important aspect also. So in closing, though, I didn't wake up yesterday to decide to run to represent this great town we call home. I have many years' experience on city boards and local volunteerism. With the combination of my experience professionally and within the city, I believe that I am the candidate to help move the city of Tarpon Springs into the future. I also grew up in this town and was involved starting at a young age. Lord willing, I want to raise my children here and see my family continue to grow. Growing up, it was mentioned by many individuals that we were the future of this town and of this country. I believe the future is now, and I believe I'm the best candidate for the future of Tarpon Springs. Thank you for your time. God bless Tarpon Springs, and God bless America.
Mr. DiDonato.
Yes, again, I want to thank all of you for leaving your homes, the comfort of your home, and being here this evening. I hope that most of your questions were answered. If I haven't answered one, feel free to ask me afterwards. But you being here means the world to me. It shows that you care about this community just as much as we do up here. I'm in love with this community. It's been my entire adult life. I've seen the ups and I've seen some downs. And because I've seen that and because I've been involved in that, I'm running not because I think I'm any better than my two opponents as a person, but I know that they couldn't love this community any more than I do. And I also know that I have the experience. I've been there and done that. I've been told no. When I first got elected commissioner in 1991, I was told no on a project that we didn't have funding for. And I simply replied back, that's funny, about 3 years ago, it was back in 88, I believe, 87, the public had passed a referendum to purchase the land to complete Sisler Field. They didn't do anything for obvious reasons. I'm not condemning that process. But when I went in and I was told no, I said, okay, now you've told me the problem. We don't have funding. Now you need to help me find a way to get it done. And we got it done. And that's only one of many projects. And that is the biggest difference between me and my opponents, is I've been there, I know how to get it done. And right now, there's a lot that needs to happen in this community. That's why Frank put his mind back into this office. I know I can help get it done. I know how to work with people. I know people in county, and I know people in the state, and I know the people in federal government. And I want to do what's best for this community. And I commend those of you, such as Robin, for example, taking a project that many didn't understand when she started it, and now she's building it to national prominence. I want to be part of that. And I think this city can do that, and I think we need to move forward, and we need to move forward now. We've been saying, we're going to look at that, we're going to look at that. Well, I'm a person that says, let's get it done. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. The League of Women Voters believes we work for informed, active participation by citizens in government. You in the audience and you three gentlemen up here are wonderful examples of that. Somebody once said all politics are local. I find it very encouraging to see the caliber of people who run for local elections here in Pinellas County. You in Tarpon Springs are fortunate to have the choices that you have here. So keep up the good work. And thank you so much for coming tonight. And I declare the meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And you are? Oh, you're the mayor? Yes, ma'am. Oh, okay. You have a great city.
Chris, thanks.
Mayor, thank you for being here.